From dyslexia to boardroom influence. Today, we're looking at how thinking differently can shape a career at the very top. This is Behind the Button. Hello and welcome to Behind the Button, the podcast that really lifts the lid on what goes on behind the scenes in the world of pay. I'm Adrian Goddard, the CIPP's commercial director, and today we're meeting someone truly remarkable, Susan Ball. Welcome, Susan.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Glad to have you here. I still remember summer last year when you posted, about your retirement and you talked about, your career and the amazing things that you'd done. From the very beginning stages at HMRC all the way to, to partnership and board level. So, it'd be really good to hear, firstly, just what are your reflections on the journey that you've been on leading up to retirement?
It doesn't feel the same when you're talking about yourself. So, whilst it seems remarkable to other people, to me, it was just one step at a time. So, I left school after A-levels. To be fair, I did have the idea at one point that I was going to go to university, actually Polytechnic, let's be honest. And I did have a place to do business studies, and I picked that particularly because being dyslexic, I knew that everything on one exam was quite tough for me.
Okay.
So it was continual assessment. But the honest answer was I was kind of burnt out. I'd had enough, 4 years of studying for exams and doing exams and getting to that stage. So I was looking around for what else potentially I could do. And as you say, I ended up in HMRC and I ended up on an apprenticeship. So they have basically an exam situation you can go into to get on the programme. So I went and sat the exam, I passed the exam, I then passed the interview, and they said, right, we're going to take you on it. I'll be honest, HMRC wasn't my first choice. They said any government department, write a list. Yeah. So I wrote down actually customs because that was separate in those days. And that was because my dad worked there. And then I wrote down HMRC, and I also threw in the Foreign Office, but I knew there was probably no chance of that because you literally had to be a graduate to get into the Foreign Office. I think, that's still quite tough to get into these days. And so I got on the programme with HMRC doing an apprenticeship, and it sort of all went from there, and it was just one step at a time.
Wow. That is remarkable. And we're going to dig a bit deeper into that journey as well. But before we do, one thing I wanted to ask you, and what we ask on Behind the Button is, we've got a question for you from one of our former guests. And what it is, the question for you is, what moment in your leadership journey really shaped the way how you lead people?
There's probably lots of moments. Obviously, being dyslexic, that shapes the way you think about things anyway. But probably the one that had the biggest impact on me, and how I then hopefully, she says, hopefully reacted to other people, was unfortunately my father died when I was in my early 30s, and I was working, and in the run up to he was quite ill. Okay. And so I think just how, my team around me helped and supported me in the run up to that, and then eventually obviously when he died and immediately afterwards, you reflect back on those things and you hope that you offer the same support to people who are going through difficult situations, because everyone reacts differently. Some days I could turn up at work, and I'm not saying I forgot it happened, because you don't forget it happens, but you can turn up at work and it's you can get on with your job and it's absolutely fine, and then you can turn up another day and it's so hard to do your job. So I think that probably was, if you have one big thing, the first time something major happens in your life, for me that happened to be that. How everyone reacts to you, how you react to it, and what that means for the future is it's life-changing.
So that's a really significant thing that you experienced there, and especially such a young age as well, only 31 years old, to lose your father, and so sorry to hear that. I guess you became just literally far more aware or compassionate, or I don't know, just in regards to your treatment of other people. Do you feel like there was much of that before, or was that literally like a kind of major eye-opening moment in like, wow, do you know what, look at, there's such a life that sits behind, all of these employees who turn up at work every day, and just, I guess, more appreciation for that.
Definitely more appreciation for it. I think, as I say, being dyslexic, I think one of the things that if you're lucky enough, like I was, to get a diagnosis when I was young.
Okay.
So that's a big deal to start with. But if you're lucky enough, you understand through that, as you're going through your school years, what your strengths and weaknesses are. So you realise, you should realise this. Everyone should realise this. You're not good at everything. But I think you particularly focus on, the fact that you're not good at certain things.
Yeah.
And so you work out how you get round that, what your coping mechanisms are, how you can overcome that. And one of the things you learn is that other people can help you.
Okay.
So, if it's a school, asking people, talking to people, I found that reading a lot of information, in order for it to sink in, I wanted to talk it through with people. I still do that when I read legislation. Read the legislation, then I want to talk it through. I want to bounce it off somebody. I want to kind of try and get into the nitty-gritty of it. So I started doing that even at school, to make sure things stuck in my brain. I wanted to talk to people.
School where you had the diagnosis?
Yeah, not through school. I was in the education system in Essex.
Okay.
And they didn't recognise dyslexia, but my parents knew something wasn't quite right.
Right.
Took me out of school and got me an assessment. The school still wouldn't recognise it. And so
even after the assessment?
Yeah, even after the assessment.
Oh my gosh.
That's still a problem today.
Yeah.
That is still a problem today. If you're lucky enough to get an assessment, there are still schools, there are still education authorities that don't recognise it. Local authorities. So, yeah, it can be a real problem. So I went through school with, the only extra support I got was because I was lucky again that my parents could help with that. Be it that, mum sitting down, helping me at the kitchen table, like parents do, to at certain points in time, particularly in the run-up to exams, perhaps getting some extra tuition to help me. So I think you learn a bit about how, you can find people who have skill sets which you don't have, and that as a team you can be much better and you can perform much better. So I think you learn that at that age. But that's completely different to then having an emotional thing happen to you and understanding how that really reacts with, just how you function on a day-to-day basis, actually.
Could you feed a little bit more into that, like what that emotional side of things in regards to like how you experienced that and how it impacted you? Well,
as I say, to start with, it's difficult, isn't it? I had a parent who was ill. They had cancer. One in two of us is going to get cancer. So this is, this happens to a lot of people.
Yeah, it does.
But we had a period of time where, it was all fine, healthy, recovery, and then it wasn't. And so we then had a period of time where we knew actually it was a matter of time and we only had a certain amount of time left. Okay. And so what you end up doing in that is wanting to spend time with the person, helping out, whatever you can do. Unfortunately, there was a decline. So that would mean sometimes, going straight from work to spending evenings helping. And then obviously towards the end, then you get to the point where, unfortunately, something's going to happen and you've still got to go to work. And so for me, I remember having what were phone calls to say, you need to get back now to wherever, home in that case, and having to drop everything.
What position were you in at work at that point in time?
So as a senior manager, I had a team.
Okay.
And, I just had to kind of phone the team and go, I need to go. Can somebody pick up this meeting I've got this afternoon, or can somebody help me? Unfortunately, that happened a few times before it was the one, which was the important one. But you didn't know that at the time because you didn't know if it's going to be the same as the last time, and actually it was okay. And I actually wasn't local. I was a few hours away. And my mum called me and said, I think you need to come back. Where are you? And I said, well, this is where I am. And so she went, oh, okay. She said, well, can you get back when you can? And I was like, yeah, okay. Put the phone down. And then you sort of sinks in and you kind of go, okay, I've got a meeting in a minute. That's why I came to this location. I don't know. So then my dad was in a hospice. I phoned the hospice and I said, I can get back by this time.
Okay.
Which was basically me going after the meeting and then travelling. Do I need to come back sooner? And the person hesitated for a minute and went, no, that should be fine. I put the phone down, walked into the meeting, sat down. And somebody else who was a colleague of mine looked at me and went, is everything okay? And I went, no, actually, I need to go. I can't have this happen. I can't not go and it be the time I need to be there. Yeah. And I don't think I can do the meeting anyway because my head's just not in the right place now. All I'm going through is, am I going to get back in time? Am I going to get back in time? And so I got out, got into the car. I mean, that's another thing. I had to get into a car, drive. So, but I got back. And so, they helped me through that. They got me into the situation where you go, you need to go, you go. Yeah. And so afterwards, obviously, then, we'll cover what we need to cover if you can't do it. But it doesn't, even if you take a few days, weeks off, whatever, it doesn't just hit you then. It hits you at various other points as, later on. Anything like that, any big thing that happens in your life, it doesn't hit you in that one moment. No, it has ripple effects. And so, you still have to kind of potentially ask somebody. And I think that's the thing. It was such a big deal. You realise then that you cannot leave home life, when you walk through the door. It doesn't happen like that. And vice versa, the same way when you walk home.
Absolutely.
So I think that realisation really sunk in then. I think until that point, there was a bit of me that thought, maybe you can put things in a box. Maybe, you can leave your emotions. But I think when you've had a big emotional event, then you realise that actually, with the best will in the world, you can't. Because some days you can go into work and for some reason you just can't concentrate.
I think with everything that you're saying, Susan, I think especially, going through that within a senior leadership position as well, I think there's a lot of, you showed a lot of strength in what you've just talked about there and how you approach that. I appreciate the pressure of actually being at a meeting. You're literally about to go into it, right? And there can be that conflict to, do I prioritize what's going on in my personal life, or do I, still deliver what I need to deliver? But glad you made that choice, to leave. We have a saying at CIPP, family first, right? And, that needs to be priority. But wow, that must have been such great exampleship as well for those that you're responsible for leading and demonstrating to them, work is important. It is. It's something that we do the most days of our lives, so the majority of our life. But you know what? Family's more important, and that's something that needs to be prioritized.
Well, and you're human. And, we're not robots. And so you cannot, necessarily do everything you do, one, without your family to support you. But equally, when something happens to them, that is equally as important, if not more important, actually. And so that, you have to respect that in people. And, we don't all talk about our lives outside work when we come into work. Sometimes we do. I think it made me, after that, treat I call them now my work family.
Oh, okay. Oh, wow, nice.
Well, but, and it's interesting, isn't it? Because you like all families, you have different characters in it, but it's the same. So actually at work, you spend a huge amount of time with these people.
You do.
Huge amount of time with them. And sometimes you know a lot about them and sometimes you don't, because some people want to share, some people don't. That's all fine. But that's no different to your family.
That's true.
When you think about it.
You can't choose your family.
No. You might be able to choose some people you work with.
Yeah, some of them. Yeah, absolutely.
Particularly if you're the one who's recruiting, but you can't choose your family. And so, if you kind of treat it like that you've got all your characters in there, that they've all got different things going on, how would you want them to behave?
Absolutely, yeah.
And take that through to work. And I think then it makes it easier. It makes you kind of realise that actually we're all just human beings.
What you're talking about, right? It resonates a lot because, you know, I back in October 2018, I lost my sister suddenly to suicide, right? Which was really traumatic, you know, just that loss. And I guess similar to your dad in that you've had this person in your life, you know, they've been a part of your existence and then suddenly they're gone, right?
Yeah.
And just that trauma of losing somebody so close. But it really changed me and reshaped how, you know, I led people moving forward. So, you know, what were some of the key moments moving forward in just what you've reflected on in how you then, you know, treated or addressed situations that your teams were going through and how you supported them moving through that?
I mean, a number of different ways. I think just the fact that you have the conversations, and as you said, if people have seen you in that you know, situation and realised how you've had to deal with it, it's a lot easier for them to come to you and have a conversation about something's going on in my life and I feel like I'm not giving it 100%. But equally, it makes it easy for you to kind of, if you're picking up signals but you don't actually know what's going on, to go, do I need to know something? Is there something going on you want to tell me? You don't have to, you know. Because people, as I say, some people want to keep things private. That's entirely up to them. But at least it makes it easier to have the conversation because you know, you never know exactly what somebody's going through and you never know exactly how they feel because we all react differently to things. But you have a better understanding of that and you can at least appreciate it. So I kind of hope that that's what, you know, I managed to do afterwards, have at least a recognition that people had things going on in their lives and that actually you cannot put it in a box and just pretend it's not happening. That's not how it works, you know. So I suppose that's one thing, and I would...
Not everyone treats it that way though, right? Like I remember years ago, an organisation that I worked for, whereby the notion was you leave your personal life at the door. When you walk through that door, it's time for you to work. And there will still be organisations today that are very much like that. So I guess what words would you give to them in how they can bring the best out of their workforce in, I guess, demonstrating more of that empathy and compassion?
Well, we talk about, don't we, about bringing your whole self to work, whether that's, you know, me being dyslexic or having something going on in your life that means that it's difficult for whatever reason.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, if you really mean that, then you've got to follow it through. You can't say, well, leave your baggage, you know, at the door and come in completely different, because that's just not how we work.
No.
You know, and I think if you do make people do that, then they'll soon walk. I mean, that's, you know, they're not going to be as wedded to an organisation and to the people they work with. Because sometimes, you know, that, I mean, you know, there's well-known statistics about, you know, you leave because your manager is not very good or whatever. Yeah. So it is the people around you that make a massive difference to whether you stay with an organisation and how they, you know, the people on the organisation treats you. So I think that's what's quite important. So I think you can't do that. I mean, you know, I'm sure there's an element of which I've got friends who are nurses, for example.
Okay.
You do have to learn how to deal with certain situations, but that's completely different.
Yeah.
You know,
I guess there's still that element of, you know, professionalism in how you approach your work, but it doesn't mean, I guess, you become a robot. You know,
exactly.
You still feel, you still experience things. You know, I remember being in my leadership meeting with my leaders and just letting them know, you know, something significant's happened in my life. So if I'm not firing on all cylinders, if I'm not 100%, this is why, you know, so just please, you know, just be mindful and just be patient with me. And you know what? The amount of support that they provided was fantastic. But you know what they said to me, which was really touching? They said, you know what, Adrian, whenever we're going through anything, you're always there for us and you're always encouraging us, you know, to take care of our own mental well-being and everything like that. You know, it's your turn. It's your turn to be able to do that. I think, it's that emulating that behaviour and demonstrating to people that level of safety, right? Yeah.
And I mean, also sometimes, you know, you have to ask people to help you because they don't, you know, they might see that you're struggling, but they don't know what they can do to help.
Yeah.
So I certainly remember having to ask people, I say, to cover meetings, perhaps, you know, double check something for me. I mean, I do that anyway, being dyslexic. So please just check this, and can you check the spelling while you're at it? But there's other things like that where you might just go, I need a bit more help with something that I don't normally need help with because my mind's not quite in the right place, or I don't even know where to start today with this thing because actually, my brain's just all over the place because I've got too much going on that's still buzzing around. Could you just, help me for a minute? And I've never found anyone who said no. The difficulty, I guess, is that if you don't ask. Absolutely. So I think it's a two-way street. You have to give people an environment which means that they feel that they can ask you, even if they don't tell you why, if they don't want to talk about that. I just need a little bit of help today because something's going on.
It's that psychological safety, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, that's so important. And we don't all have that. So
it's unfortunate, but it's a reality.
It is.
Not everyone has that.
No.
You've talked quite a bit so far about dyslexia, right? But and I know that your journey, you've gone from an apprentice within the HMRC all the way up to a partner of RSM and president and chair, in the likes of Chartered Institute of Taxation, and now still a board member, now and supporting British Dyslexia Association as well. But on your journey, especially as a leader, a senior leader. How did you approach, I guess, having dyslexia as a leader? Because obviously you're aware of it from when you were younger, but then in how you then presented yourself in the workplace, what did that look like? Well,
as we've talked about already, I think the fact that you recognise that you can't do everything, that you're not good at certain things, and asking people for help. So putting teams together, making sure I had people around me who perhaps had skills I didn't have. That was something I did. But I'll be honest, I didn't tell everyone I was dyslexic. In fact, I didn't tell everyone I was dyslexic for a long time. Okay. It's only in more recent years. So I sat, if people asked me, because they might figure it out, then I would say, yes, I am.
Why did you shift, though, in starting to tell people?
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to that point on, feeling safe within an environment. Okay. And I suppose that's one thing. I think the other thing is, when you're lucky enough to get to that position, you kind of want to change things. You want to make somebody else's experience better. Okay. And in order to do that, sometimes you have to put yourself out there and you have to say, this is my issue, this is my problem, this is what I'm dealing with. I've still managed to do all this, and you can too. And so you can hopefully make it better for other people. But, that does take time. And I think that particularly, well, I mean, it's still the case, but there's a whole generation like myself who have probably all done similar things in that we've all been quiet about it. If you look at how many people now are talking about the fact they're dyslexic or they have a neurodivergence, we are much more open to having these conversations now than when I was younger. Equally, I think, if you had a bad experience at school, and I didn't particularly have a great experience, it wasn't the worst, to be fair, but when you're told you're lazy, when you're told that you're not very bright, and actually that's not the case. It's just you can't communicate on paper, perhaps, to the level that you can if you're talking to somebody.
I think there's a lot of people that will be listening to this, right, who, especially if they've got dyslexia or they know somebody with dyslexia, I think that'll probably really touch quite a sensitive point, in having that, I guess, label of you're not as intelligent or you're not as capable or, you don't have great results and things like that. So, what would you say to encourage people like that?
We're in a completely different time now. And I think, you can be much more open. I recognise that each person has to decide whether that's right for them. And again, if it's in the workplace, there's a lot of statistics at the moment that say that people still don't want to disclose because they don't feel safe doing so. So it's entirely up to them. They've got to do it at the time that's right for them, and in a way that feels right, and also that they're comfortable with. But it is a lot better than it used to be, and hopefully we'll get even more better because we're still having a lot more conversations now about this, and people are understanding a lot more. So there's a lot more information out there. I mean, I recognise that even my own understanding of dyslexia has changed from when I was younger to today. I mean, I knew that I didn't have some of the same issues that some dyslexics have.
Okay.
You know, I don't see, letters jumping around the page, for example. So I don't need filters. But I wasn't very good at spelling. Sometimes my short-term memory is a little bit sketchy.
Okay.
And so, you know, you recognise more of that, one, as you get older, but also as you understand more about what that means. And I think just that thought process that there's nothing I can do about it on one level. I can put mechanisms in place to help and make and teach myself things that make it easier. But ultimately, it's the way that my brain's wired. So unless I'm going to, you know, jiggle around with that.
Please do not be performing brain surgery on yourself.
No, that would be terrible. But yeah, so that's, you know, those sorts of things then help you, I think, have a better understanding of it. And I think that's why, you know, we're going through a period also where we're in some respects reframing. So, you know, in schools, we're trying to explain to children, you know, that they do have strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah.
And that, you know, actually it means that their brain functions like this. And some things they find a lot easier to do than others because of that. Now, some people don't like the fact that it's being reframed. But if you've, you know, if you're like me and you've gone through the system where actually you were told you were stupid when you know you're actually not stupid.
Well, to achieve everything that you've achieved, I think you must be very intelligent, if anything.
Well, I think there's an element of which it was proving a point. I'm not quite sure who I was proving it to. But I think part of that is, you know, I took my career one step at a time. It was always like, what's the next thing? What's the next thing I can do? How can I... And... You know, I think I was slightly proving it to myself. I don't think it was anyone else I was really proving it to, but it was like, I am good enough. I can do this.
Do you think that proving it to yourself has stopped?
I think so. You never know.
Okay.
I think you have. I mean, I think you get to a point where actually, you know... But it's the classic imposter syndrome, really, on one level. Everybody has something that they're like, oh, am I good enough to do that? You know, do I have the skills? So I think it's no different to that. So lots of people have it, whether they're dyslexic or not. But I think for me, that was certainly a motivation for, you know, wanting to get on my career, wanting to do well. It was actually because I wanted to prove to myself I could.
Okay, nice. I'd like to dig a little bit deeper in regards to, like, you talked before about how you mobilize teams and stuff like that, right? And the importance of doing that in leaning into enabling your strengths more to shine and for them to, in essence, facilitate maybe some of your limitations, let's say, right? I think I'd like to dig into that because I remember when I first joined the CIPP, right? Because of how my brain's wired, I don't think I'm neurotypical at all. Not been formally diagnosed, but if I've got anything, I've most likely got ADHD, right? And, you know, I was really upfront with my leaders in how I work, you know, that, you know, super creative, but on an operational level, not very good. So really, I'll bring all the ideas and all the creativity and all that kind of stuff. And he really, you guys, you know, in the execution, you know, and maintenance of everything and things like that. And actually, and just various ways of working and whatnot, where because I was aware I could be proactive with it, it actually made for some really good relationships and working ways, right? So what were some of the methods or some of the things that you did in mobilizing your teams and ensuring that you could have a really successful working relationship?
I think it's, you know, finding out what they're good at. Sounds stupid, but as I say, not everyone is good at everything. So try and find out the things that they're good at and then try and work out how you play to their strengths.
Okay.
Now, clearly, then what that means is you might have some gaps. So again, it's like, how do you plug the gaps? And that might be loads of different things. I mean, if I look at when I started work, I didn't have a computer on my desk, so I'm that old.
You
so
don't look it.
Thank you.
Which is great.
But if you look back at my career, you'd work it out. But yeah, so I think, it's like, how do you plug the gaps that you've got? So work and find out what people's strengths are. How do you plug the gaps? Maybe that's you need to look at the next person you hire has the skill set, or it may be technology. Because we've got loads of technology now, absolutely fantastic. It's been a godsend to me. Having a computer, spell checkers. Now obviously with things like Copilot, etc., amazing. It's improved my life no end. So I think those sorts of things. It's like how do you work to everyone's strengths, and I think also explaining it to them. I think I didn't do that at various points in time because I kind of assumed people knew.
Right. Okay.
Which is a bit silly because sometimes, it's like everything. It's like in a relationship, you assume somebody knows something and you're like, actually, no, you need to sometimes communicate.
Yeah.
So reminding myself that actually, you need to explain to somebody that the reason they do X and you've got them doing X is because they're really good at it and they're much better than some of the rest of us at it. And you really want them to do that. And that also helps with their purpose. Why do we turn up to work? What are we trying to achieve? If they realise they have a purpose and they have a purpose in the team dynamic, then actually, that carries quite a lot as well.
Probably at least since COVID, if not slightly before then. I think there was more of a motivation for people to be a part of something that actually has purpose rather than just, going to work for a good job and everything like that. So, and especially with the younger generation as well. I think, unless there's actually a purpose and a why behind what they're doing, it can be very hard to have that longevity in actually being committed, to doing something. So I think that's really quite a powerful point. Well, even also just I think, reading between the lines, just the humility that you must have brought to your leadership to enable other people to shine. I think that can be, and I've seen it many times in my leadership journey, that can be a blocker and an issue at times whereby some leaders, they want to be in the spotlight or they want to be number one, they want to be, the one who's known in their brand and all that, rather than seeing that, some of the true essence and greatness of leadership is actually elevating other people and allowing them to shine instead. Absolutely.
Recently we had the admission ceremony for the Institute of Tax. And, seeing those, we've talked about this before, but because you have a similar thing, obviously, seeing everyone come up and get their certificate, seeing the next generation come through, it's so rewarding. It's amazing. To be able to then lift them up into their career and say to them, this is what you should be doing. This is where, you're starting out. The job you're doing is really important because we can't do all of these things unless you do your bit. And I think we forget that sometimes, that it is a team effort, just because one person might have a shiny spotlight on them. Actually, they're never functioning on their own, whether that's people in the office or people at home. Who's supporting them? Somebody's always there supporting them. And it's making sure that they get a light, shined on them as well. So I
think it just makes organisations all the more better in that. I like the word synergy, right? In 1 + 1 = 3, right? In that actually, in collaborating and working together, whether internally or externally, like with other organisations and things like that, actually there's something far greater that you can create if you enable people, to actually be their best. Like what
Absolutely.
You talked about before.
You can elevate things dramatically if you play to everybody's strengths. Because that, just by nature of the fact that you're not, getting people to do things that they're not particularly good at and they're spending an inordinate amount of time. And certainly for me, I remember at various points in my career spending an inordinate amount of time trying to do some things because my brain just wouldn't function, but I had to do them. And so you would spend a huge amount of time and energy trying to do that. And the mental load of that's quite tough. And so that's wasted, because if I'd have been only doing the things that I was really good at and you'd have found somebody else who was really good at those things, just think what level you would have got to. And I think that's what's so frustrating. You see it, often in organisations, that you become good at a thing and then, they move you into doing something which actually isn't your strengths. So in professional services, quite often, you become good at managing a team or technical or something, and then they move you into something else. And sometimes you're not as good at that. And you're just thinking, well, it would be much better if you played to my strengths as opposed to trying to get me to do things that I'm not quite as good at.
Do you think, though, a part of the onus is also on the individual in understanding themselves and being able to set those boundaries to understand what to say no to because of their own understanding of their own strengths and their own limitations? And actually, I'll put that to you, actually, in that, have you actually ever had a situation where you have had to do that yourself?
Not exactly. I suppose the most recent situation was actually when I decided that I would go for being president of the Chartered Institute of Tax, because I initially convinced myself I wouldn't, because I don't particularly like public speaking, which some people will find amazing. But what I mean by that is I knew that you had a script quite often to read.
Okay.
And I knew that I was not very good at reading from scripts. Despite the fact I've done loads of presentations, despite the fact we're having a chat here, stick a script in front of me and ask me to read it. It sends me back to the moment when you're at school and they ask you to stand up in front of the whole class and read something. And I just become that little person again, and it panics me. And so, I initially said, no, I didn't think that was for me. And I had a number of people who came up to me and said, you should, you're good enough, you can do it, it will be fine. And so I thought, actually, why am I so scared of this thing? And I think as I say, it goes back to their being at school, and it also goes back to the fact that you learn coping mechanisms. So one of my coping mechanisms is, if I know I'm not going to do something very well, is to try and deflect or do something else.
Okay.
So when you're in class, you start at that. The teacher says, "Can somebody tell me the answer to whatever?" If you know the answer, then stick your hand up quickly. Don't get picked on. But equally, it worked in the workplace. If you were in a meeting or something, the last thing I wanted to do was to write anything down anywhere public. So I wouldn't want to write on like in school, blackboard, wouldn't want to do it. Flip chart, no, don't get me to do that.
Okay.
So you quite often have group things where you ask people to write things down. No, I'd volunteer for the first thing I could possibly volunteer for that wasn't that thing.
Right.
Because then I'd got a job, so hopefully I wouldn't get another job. And it was a thing that was in something I felt comfortable with. And so this was something that I wasn't comfortable with, and I thought, well, I won't volunteer for that. I won't put my name forward because I'm not going to be comfortable in that situation. And then, you do get to the point where you can't live your whole life not trying anything that you're not comfortable with. Otherwise, you'd never do anything.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And so ultimately, I, said, fine, okay, yes, I will put my name forward. But I still hated reading speeches.
That's a big step, though, right? And I think there's a lot of people within our profession that, if anything, can find it really challenging, like just putting themselves out there and having a spotlight on them. Even doing something like this, like being on a podcast, right, where, the spotlight's on you, right, and your story. But for those who are listening, how did you step across that line, I guess, to equip them for how they may be able to do the same thing?
I think the way you look at yourself is always worse than everyone else sees you. So we're much more critical of ourselves.
That's deep. That's really deep. That's really deep.
But that's true. You sit there and I overanalyze, and I'm sure most of us do to a certain extent. We're always much more critical of ourselves. We don't like this, we don't like that. We don't. So I think you have to kind of go, how bad can it be? And if you can think of the worst thing that could happen and then work out how you would deal with that, then actually, how bad can it be, really? So after people said to me, I don't know why you think that's bad, I was thinking, well, what's the worst thing? What's the worst thing? So I could stand up on stage and I could freeze, but I've got a script. Okay. I could stumble over my words. Will anyone remember?
It's true. Oh, it's true.
So, and once you kind of break it down, and I think it's breaking it down into chunks and then going, how would I handle that? Then you suddenly realise that it's not actually as big and scary as it felt. And so I would do that. I would kind of sit there and go, how do I break this down? How would I cope if this happened, that happened? Is that bad, really?
I love what you're saying. It reminds me of we had another guest on not too long ago, and they spoke about being anxious and whatnot, and talked about their coping mechanism of creating a environment of safety within an unsafe environment, right? And it sounds a little bit like what you're talking about, in that actually it's that framing of, what's the worst that could happen, but actually, this is how we'll deal with it, or in the grand scheme of things, this is really what it means, and it's not as bad as as what where your mind may take you, right? But it's creating that space of, well, this is where I'm safe, and this is how I'll deliver that. But it sounds, what you're talking about sounds like a great way of supporting just having that confidence to be able to take that kind of action. Well,
I think also that if you've thought all of that through, you also know how to handle it if something goes wrong.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
And so, for me, that's how I found it easy, just to break it down, manageable chunks.
Just tapping into that self-awareness that you're talking about, right? How has that enabled you to navigate, especially navigating relationships, in such a senior position?
I think it's the same, isn't it? It's like, if you're around a boardroom table, or you're in a meeting with senior people, confidence. So obviously, the more senior you get, hopefully you get a bit of confidence along the way. so I think it's having confidence in being able to articulate it, planning, thinking it through, but also looking at the team dynamics. It's no different. You've got a group of people in a room. How do they behave? What do they do? What are their strengths and weaknesses? And therefore, how can you react to that? So I think it's just different sorts of teams. They're all teams. So I think that's quite important. I think, again, my analogy before about families, there's always a quiet one. And it's sort of like we're looking out for the quiet ones and going, actually, they probably have something really important to say. For some reason, they're not saying it. And how can you help facilitate that?
How have you helped facilitate that, like literally practically in that kind of environment? Like, what have you done?
Yeah, well, I mean, either asking them out of the meeting, because sometimes it is just that bit about, being scared in the moment.
Yeah.
I think the other thing is, preparation for things like that. I love an agenda to a meeting. I love the thought, being able to think through things before I get there, so I can have a think about how I might articulate a point I want to make. But of course, if you don't have that for whatever reason, then perhaps asking people afterwards, or suggesting at the end of the meeting that if anyone's got anything that they think of after the meeting, that could they perhaps feed it in?
Nice.
So that somehow you gain those extra thoughts, because, getting all of that variety of thought is usually where you end up with some of the magic.
Absolutely. I find that, like, sometimes, like you said, the quietest person in the room can have some of the best ideas.
Exactly.
And many times the quietest person has actually had the time to really digest the information, digest what people are saying, digest what's going on within the meeting. Sometimes the noisier people haven't had that time to really process. But no, I think it's good, whether within the meeting or outside of the meeting, still creating those opportunities to be able to capture what those thoughts and perspectives are.
It's important.
So, we've talked about creating that safe space, right? And really being able to address different types of people, different types of, thoughts, processes and things like that. But obviously there's people who are currently within organizations whereby they don't have that. they don't have that opportunity or that benefit, or maybe a leader like yourself, for example. So how would you encourage somebody to be able to navigate and still get the best out of that kind of situation, even though they might not be in a safe space or in an environment what's accommodating for the kind of person that they are?
I mean, I think it always helps if you've got somebody you can talk to. It might not be somebody at work. I mean, clearly, if it's somebody at work, that's great because they understand the work environment you're in. That might not be your manager. That might be somebody else who's just in the organisation. So I would always try and find somebody you can talk to, because it definitely helps if it's somebody who understands where your environment is and exactly what you do. If you can't get that, then obviously outside, hopefully you can have somebody that you can, sound off to when you get frustrated. I would think very much about, trying to articulate your strengths and weaknesses, even if you don't want to talk about anything else. Because then hopefully that's an easier way of having a conversation without actually going, well, this is my issue. Because we all know that people have strengths and weaknesses. So I would try and find ways to compensate for that, So if you're good at one thing and you're not so good at the other, is there something you can do? Is there something you can have, tech or anything else? And see if, or even, and I would say this, there's loads of tech out there. It's sometimes you don't know how to use the tech. Maybe that's just me, but it's like
I'm sure you're not alone, Susan.
Well, I'm sure there's always, because there's so many changes now that you may find that there's something, and it may just be about asking somebody who's good at that particular bit of kit, whatever it is. I would find it really useful if it did this, but I haven't figured out if it does that, because that would help you. And you're not then necessarily having to say anything you don't feel comfortable with. So I think, I think there's all of that. And I think ultimately I would look around to see, if there's anybody who might actually have said, so like, for me, when I disclosed I was dyslexic more publicly, I had quite a lot of people who I didn't know, who, I'd worked with, who were friends of mine, etc., who also came up to me and said, well, I'm dyslexic as well.
Oh my gosh! Wow.
And I was
I bet that did a lot for them in you communicating that, being so open about it.
Exactly. So I think if you find somebody potentially in the organisation who has disclosed, then again you might want to talk to them. And people are they if you say I don't want to tell everybody, they're not going to tell them. They know what it's like. So that's your story to tell when you want to tell it. So, but they're also much more helpful because, they can be a supporter of yours. So I think, I would search around for those people who you can talk to. It's the same. It's the same as in anything's going on in your life. As I say, we talked about other things that go on in your life. It's good to talk. It really is.
It is. It absolutely is. Do just touching on what you're saying there, right? There will be a lot of people who've been diagnosed, right? And like you said, whenever, or if their time is ready or they feel comfortable to communicate that, they can do so. But there's probably more people who have not been diagnosed, who a lot of stuff that you've talked about and that they may have researched or independent tests that they've done, which point towards whether it's dyslexia or a form of neurodivergence. And I'm asking this because, so for example, myself, somebody not being diagnosed, though I'm pretty convinced that I've got neurodivergence, I've done a multitude of tests, I've had consultations and stuff like that, which all point towards ADHD. But it can be sometimes mixed in regards to how that's received because you don't have a formal diagnosis. So what would you say to people that a lot of these things resonate, but they don't have a diagnosis and maybe they don't even feel comfortable having one as well? But I guess how would you encourage them in how they approach work and their life?
That's a really big question. So, well, I think it is difficult. I think if you look at, well, let's go to Gen Z at the moment. Okay. So we've got Gen Z coming through. A lot of Gen Z will perhaps have a better understanding now. And so therefore might see some traits in themselves. Now, sometimes That might mean that actually if they were to go for a formal diagnosis, they'll get one. But it might also mean you might not, because it's a spectrum. And if you're far enough on the spectrum, you'll get a formal diagnosis. But if you're not, then you won't. So I think, you've got to understand that. But actually, if you look at, I think, some of the latest statistics on it, there's about 50% of Gen Z that are identifying. Well, that's a huge amount of people coming into the workforce.
It is.
So workforces have to really understand that, there are people coming in now who recognise that they have some of these traits, whether they've got a formal diagnosis or not, and have an expectation that workplaces will be able to, accommodate them in a way that they feel is appropriate.
Yeah. And
the biggest thing at the moment, I think, is that actually most workforces don't cope with that very well, because the workforces, if you take the sort of 80-20 rule, which, there is a sort of 80-20 rule, because they say around about 20% of the population at the moment, despite the fact what I've just said about potentially Gen Z coming through, then, the workforce is set up for 80% of the people.
Yeah.
But why? Why is it that we set up a workforce for 80% of the people and expect the other 20% to cope with it? There's a lot of things that could be done that actually would help everybody, and make it easier for everyone, regardless. And I think that's where, I think workforces now have to start kind of readdressing and going, have we set ourselves up here in a way that gets the best out of everybody? And it's frustrating for me, because you sit there and think, even if I talk about the 20% of every workforce, you're not getting the best out of 20% of every workforce.
That's a big number.
That's a big number.
It's a big number. Yeah, it is.
If only, perhaps you dealt with things slightly differently. And sometimes it's not a massive change that you have to make. When we just talked about meetings, for example, putting some things in that might help. Agendas to meetings, giving everybody the reading
meetings
material.
with no agenda.
Exactly. That's what I mean. So putting them in, making sure people have got time to have the reading beforehand, making sure there's perhaps other ways of communicating what their thoughts are. They're not big things.
No, they're not. They're not.
So a lot of it isn't a massive change. It's just that we've dealt with a lot of things for a long period of time in a particular way. And we need to sometimes make some subtle changes. And I hope that organisations are doing that. And people, Gen Z will come in, that's what they'll expect. They'll expect it also because you don't necessarily need a formal diagnosis to get support at school. So you may have, if they're lucky, obviously there are situations where you do need to get a formal diagnosis to get the best support. And we also have, unfortunately, problems at the moment where people with formal diagnoses aren't getting the support at school. But there are occasions where you don't need a diagnosis to be able to get some support. So if that's been your journey through school, you will come into the workplace with an expectation that actually that follows through and you're not getting support. And so, your experience of going into an organisation could be quite negative quite quickly. If that doesn't follow through.
And I think like what you talked about before, you referenced when you were talking about public speaking, I believe it was that point, you referenced when you have to read from something, suddenly becoming that little girl at school. And like you said, if somebody is experiencing, having negative experiences from school and that feeds through to the workplace because the workplace isn't accommodating them, then actually that can continually be taking people back to that really uncomfortable place, that they once were. And I guess for people who are responsible for them, who are leading them, may not even realise that little comments or little, various approaches are actually feeding into triggering people, with things like that. But yeah, I think it's definitely something workplaces need to be far more mindful of.
I think so. And I think, one has to hope that that's going to change. We are starting to see more conversations about it, more understanding, and also, what that means for people. So as I say, the trouble is that it is difficult, and I understand that. It's like, I said I'm dyslexic. About 10% of the population is dyslexic as far as we know, but obviously there might be a whole load of other people who we don't know about.
Okay.
But, there's vast difference between my experience of dyslexia and somebody else's. There's only about 4% of the population that are really severely dyslexic. So it's like, it's easier for me to articulate to you what I struggle with, but it is a personal thing and it's individual. And so, we all make sweeping generalisations, but you actually have to talk to people and ask and give them the space to be able to communicate, this is actually my issue, that's my issue.
Do you know what, Susan? That's a great segue for my final question that I wanted to ask you, all right? And I really want you to speak into future leaders with this question, but what one message would you give, future or upcoming leaders, especially those who may feel that they do think differently in, how they could best approach leadership to support the future shape of the workforce?
I do think, if they can communicate their experience and be open about it, then, as you said earlier, that makes a massive difference. It sets a tone. So I think really, that's one of the biggest things leaders can do. So if they feel that, they're neurodivergent and they want to share it, that would be fantastic because it makes it so much easier for everyone else in their organisation. I think if they keep quiet about it, then, understandable. I completely get that because, they might have had the same experience I had. And if you've had a bad experience potentially when you were younger, it does follow through with you, unfortunately. But I think then they've got to recognise that they've somehow got to create an environment where people can share, because otherwise they're not getting the best out of people. And there are now statistics on how much that will actually uplift performance if you get the absolute best out of everybody and you put teams together based on that. They're doing themselves a disservice, I think, if they don't, but it's understandable potentially. But somehow they've got to create that environment.
And I think, I think even just what we're doing here today and the fact that you've been so incredibly open, about your own life and your own journey and challenges and, things that you've achieved, I think it will really be inspiring for many people and touch many people. So thank you. I really appreciate you sharing everything that you've shared today and all the work that you've done with the CIPP, because you've worked with us for many, many years, Susan. I'm going to ask you to leave a question for our next guest on Behind the Button. So what would your question to them be?
If you could have made one decision earlier on in your career, what would it be?
Brilliant. Well, thank you. Listen, I really appreciate you. I'm looking forward to hearing the answer to that question. But, it's been absolutely awesome having you on our podcast today on Behind the Button. And again, I'm sure it's going to help many people.
Thank you.
Don't forget to hit the subscribe or follow button on your favourite podcast player. And if you're watching on YouTube, tap the like button, drop us a comment, and make sure you subscribe so that you never miss an episode. And if you've got any questions for us, suggestions for future guests, or want to tell us your own payroll story, we'd love to hear from you. Just email behindthebutton@cipp.org.uk. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.